Welcome to the Pandemic Recovery Priorities Industry Conversation webinar. I'm Sarah Stickler, Executive Director of WTS, and it is my pleasure to welcome you here today for a discussion on our industry's response to COVID-19 and how our allied associations are responding to these unprecedented times. A few housekeeping items. All attendees are on mute, so we encourage you to use the chat and Q&A features on the toolbar. Time permitting, we will have a Q&A at the end of our panel. Please add your questions directly to the Q&A. You are also invited to chat with your fellow attendees in the chat section, but we'll go to the Q&A part for questions. I'd like to take a moment to thank our WTS corporate partners. Our corporate partner support makes webinars like this possible and allows WTS to continue to advance women and advance transportation. I would like to give a special recognition to our Trailblazer partners, AECOM, HDR, HNTB, Jacobs, and WSP for their continued and extraordinary support of our organization. It is now my honor to introduce your moderator for today's panel, Paula Hammond. Paula is the chair of the WTS International Board of Directors and is the Senior Vice President, National Transportation Market Leader with WSP USA. Paula dedicated her 34-year public service career to improving transportation systems in Washington State and served as Washington Secretary of Transportation from 2007 to 2013. She has been a national figure on transportation issues with leadership on numerous AASHTO committees, TRB Executive Board, and serves on the ARPA Board of Trustees. Paula.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We at WTS are very fortunate to have strong relationships with key transportation associations and organizations who have joined us today. Our panelists are people who have accomplished much for our industry, and I have great respect for the leadership that they continue to provide. With the impacts of the pandemic and our stark recognition that we have a long way to go to provide equity and inclusion in our transportation systems and industry, we're here today to discuss how we as a transportation industry and the organization that represents thousands of our members from public agencies and the private sector can work together to emerge from our current situation to shape a stronger transportation system, solutions for all communities, and build the diverse workforce of the future that we desire. I'd like to introduce our panelists this morning, and what I'm going to do is introduce them one by one and have each of them give an orientation to their organization and also talk a little bit about how they are working with their membership, doing their business during this stay-home order, and give a sense of what they're doing right now to support their members. So first up, I would like to introduce Brandy Hendrickson. Brandy Hendrickson was named Deputy Director of the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials, known as AASHTO, in August of 2019. Brandy has a long history of leadership in both the state DOT at Indiana. From the DOT, was the head of the personnel for the state, and has most recently been the acting administrator and deputy administrator of the Federal Highway Administration from 2017 to 2019. We are pleased to have you here today, Brandy, and would you share with us a bit about how AASHTO is working during COVID-19?
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Paula. It's nice to see you. Nice to see everyone else. So AASHTO, as many of you know, is an organization that represents all 52 state departments of transportation. And we are a multimodal organization. We are representing all transportation modes. And our primary goal is to provide value to those state DOTs in the fostering of the development and the maintenance and the operation of our transportation system in this country. And so, state DOTs have really been at the forefront of the COVID response, and they're finding that they're really doing some things that they wouldn't normally expect to do. Some of them are managing call centers, for example, for unemployment. But certainly all of them are ensuring that their transportation systems remain open and available for the citizens that they serve, especially as critical freight movement is, the goods and services that are required to get where they need to go, and making sure that the system is available for those things. So as an organization, AASHTO has been working remotely, as most of us have been. We've been able to find new and creative ways to connect with each other and connect with our members, virtually, of course. We do a lot of really great in-person meetings in the summer that really enable us to, get the work of the committee work, the work of AASHTO done face-to-face. And as many of you have shifted to virtual meetings, we also have, and we've been able to be very productive in the execution of those meetings as well. But we do look forward to a time when we can all be back together face-to-face in being able to have those meetings that AASHTO is really known for. One of the major priorities of AASHTO that we've been working on over the last 12, 13, 14 weeks now, the weeks kind of all meshed together, but is really working on the $50 billion request to Congress for funding relief for state departments of transportation as a backstop for lost state revenues. And we know that state departments of transportation across the country are really struggling on the revenue side. Traffic counts are down by as much as 40 or 50% in some cases, which translates to lost revenue for states. And many states are having to make very tough decisions all across the board related to their construction programs. Many states are having to make tough decisions related to furloughs and layoffs of their employees. And we know that, state DOT operations are critical to be able to really maintain the transportation systems that we all rely on. There's also, a direct impact to the industry, the construction and consulting industry, in having uncertainty in the marketplace related to these construction programs. And so that's why we really think that this federal backstop is so critical in being able to maintain those programs at levels that were anticipated throughout the summer. So that's been how, the main thing that we've been working on really over the course of the last few months in really educating Congress on the need for this federal backstop. We have worked very closely with our industry partners and our transportation coalition to get the point across on the private sector side as well. So I'm really happy to be here with you all today, and I very much value the partnership that AASHTO has with WTS, and am really thankful for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you. Thank you, Brandy. Our next speaker that I'd like to introduce is Paul Skatellis, who's the APTA President and Chief Executive Officer for the American Public Transportation Association, or better known as APTA. Paul's been there since 2018. His entire career has been in public transportation, serving in both the public and the private sector. Prior to joining APTA, Paul was my boss at WSP USA and was a key market leader and organized us all around our services for WSP. He was also the Chief Executive Officer at the Port Authority of Allegheny County and the Central Florida Regional Transportation Authority in Florida, has a long history. And I'd also like to say that it would not be fair if I didn't also recognize that we're pleased to recognize Paul is the WTS International 2020 recipient of the Honorable Ray LaHood Award that recognizes men who are both leaders in transportation in the industry and have directly contributed to the advancement of women and minorities. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you, Paula, very much. What a joy it is to join you, and I thank you and Sarah and WTS for getting us together to have this session today. As Brandy has indicated, I think all of us would rather be physically together so we can not only see each other but interact in a little different way. But we'll take this for what we can get out of it, which is a great way to at least connect and to talk about the issues that we're all dealing with. Well, I would begin with just I think what we've all recognized here in the last 3 months, that all of us are dealing with unprecedented challenges. We've never seen them. We've never lived through them before. There's no playbook. And certainly for APTA, we got the message as an association level very early, virtually right away, that there was great stress on our transit agencies. And in fact, with the turndown and lockdown of the economy, with the shelter-in-place restrictions that went into effect, with business activity really coming to a screeching halt, our agency saw virtually from day one a dramatic, precipitous drop in ridership, and with that, revenue losses at the fare box. And even beyond that, the fact that with business activity ratcheting down, many of these, if not all of our systems, also have other tax support for their operations. So it's either a sales tax or tolls or some combination, or perhaps even payroll taxes. And so with those on the decline, a great amount of stress on the agencies. We had seen ridership declines on the rail systems as much as 90%. And on the bus systems, an overall average of about 70%, while still having to maintain a fairly robust level of service in order to make sure that it served its primary function, which is to provide service for essential workers, getting workers to hospitals, getting them to grocery stores, getting them to pharmacies, quite frankly, doing all the things that are necessary for the rest of us to be able to live our lives as we have over the last 3 months or so. So tremendous amount of stress. What we understood was this would be a real financial pressure on the agency. So we worked very hard with the administration and Congress, and we're very fortunate to win approval of $25 billion for public transit as part of the CARES Act. That has been a lifeline in terms of stabilizing the operations. So the good news is they have time to catch their breath for a few months. But we also recognize that given the protraction here of the economic fallout, that unfortunately 25 billion alone is not going to be enough for the industry. So we have made a second request, which is based on an independent economic study that has been done for the industry that suggests a minimum of 23 billion additional funds necessary to carry most of the agencies through the better part of 2021. So a lot of focus is on that. Beyond that, though, we have really been very active as an association, helping our members get information, share best practices, develop new approaches, and you probably have heard and read about them, separating and safeguarding operators on buses, for example, from riders, making sure that they're not infecting one another with the contagion virus. So the wearing of face masks, the social distancing requirements, the issues of fare collection, all have been front and center in terms of making the agencies really responsive and responsible stewards in terms of carrying our riders and doing it in the safest possible way. For us as an association, really what has guided us virtually from day one has been asking ourselves the question, what are our members thinking? What are they feeling pressures on, and how can we respond to those? And those have really formed the basis for us carrying out all of our activities, from town halls to webinars to important sessions to listen to our transit CEOs and to our business members. They really have formed the basis upon which we have instituted these various programs. So challenging time, but we're not alone, I know.
Well, none of us were expecting what came to bear in February or earlier this year. It's amazing how quickly all of these organizations have stepped up and into the role that is necessary to get organized quickly and put technology to place so that we can continue to do the good business of the associations. Thank you, Paul. I'd like to next introduce Dave Bauer. Dave is the ARTBA President and CEO. We love the jargon. American Road and Transportation Builder Association. Dave has been the CEO since 2019, but has been with ARTBA since 1997. Getting up there. He can tell you a little bit about ARTBA's business. I'm proud member of ARTBA and have been able to serve on the board of directors for some time. So it's been a great relationship, Dave, and thank you. I would just introduce you a bit by recognizing the good work that ARTBA is doing around not just advocacy for what Ashto and Brandy have talked about for transportation revenues, but helping all of us in the industry understand where things lie within each state and what the revenue impacts of COVID have been. So why don't you talk a little bit about that, and welcome to the panel.
My pleasure. Thank you, Paula, and thank you, WTS, for allowing our organization to be part of today's discussion. And it's good to see all the other panelists. As Paula mentioned, our organization, the American Road and Transportation Builders Association, represents all aspects of the transportation design and construction industry. This means our members include design professionals, contractors, equipment manufacturers, materials and service suppliers, as well as public officials and research practitioners. And so it is really a diverse group of individuals who are focused on all modes of transportation from an infrastructure standpoint. And so this has really been an interesting time for us, and it's been great to see how our association and the industry that we represent has evolved. When I think about the beginning of the pandemic, the huge focus of our members was, and our 36 state chapters was working with Brandy's members to develop protocols and practices and implement them to assure not only the safety of the individuals who are working in transportation infrastructure development projects, but also the traveling public. As many of you know, just about every governor deemed construction and transportation construction an essential service. And I think there were only a handful of states that were shut down, which meant that our members not only had to figure out how to do the incredibly challenging task of building infrastructure projects in today's environment, but also to do it in a manner that minimized the risk of COVID-19 on their employees, which are their most valuable asset. I mean, and so, it was really an impressive public-private partnership between, our industry and Brandy's members. And I can't, congratulate everybody who was involved in that enough. And, as the pandemic manifested, as Brandy mentioned, the revenue declines, started, complicating not only the challenge of being safe while we're constructing projects, but the continuity of these programs. I mean, and so it's been a really difficult needle to thread. And, one of the things that we've seen in this environment where, uncertainty is a vast understatement is the demand for information. And, what we have instituted is an almost nightly report to our membership about the status of both construction projects in individual states, as well as, their revenue situation. And, it's just, it's an environment where we are all struggling to keep abreast of developments, and, the information has just been an elevated premium, especially real-time information, hence the 50+ nightly reports that we've been putting out over the past 12 weeks. And that has been a new service on the part of our association, but one that, frankly, I think our membership expects us to evolve with the times. And, and that's what we have and will continue to do. And at the same time, while we've been struggling heavily or heavily focused on continuity activities, at the same time, we also have a federal highway and public transportation reauthorization that's due at the end of September. And to that end, Our chairman, Steve McGew of HCSS, a Houston-based software company, testified before the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee last week on their proposal to reauthorize the federal highway program for the next 5 years. I mean, and so, you know, it is a challenge or an environment where we're all challenged to walk and chew gum at the same time. And, you know, and so that has been an interesting opportunity for our association, and I look forward to talking to you about it more. So thank you again.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Dave. Next, we have Bradley Mims. A. Bradley Mims is the president and CEO of the Conference of Minority Transportation Officials, COMPTO. Welcome, Bradley. COMPTO is the nation's leading advocacy organization for minority professionals and businesses in the transportation and infrastructure business. Would like to hear a little bit more about that. He has, Mr. Mims has served as a transportation professional in government and the private sector for over 40 years. We should add up all the years of service that we all have. It might be groundbreaking. As government relations specialist with a multimodal transportation background, Brad holds a special affinity for the entire transportation industry. Welcome, Brad. Tell us a little bit about COMPTO and how you're getting your business done.
Well, good morning and good afternoon to all of you in the audience today. And I am very proud of COMPTO and where we are. We are reaching a very significant plateau as an organization as we are moving into our 50th year as an organization. And we are very proud. We're very proud of moving into the 50th year, but we are also very proud of the fact that we have become an international organization. With the addition of a chapter, we have 33 chapters, and our 34th chapter is Toronto. So we are now officially an international organization, and we are doing our best to make sure that we are looking out for the interests of minorities and minority businesses. And we want to make sure that as we move down the road that we are partnering with like-minded organizations and those organizations that will be helpful in moving our cause forward. So we've been moving forward and making sure that during this pandemic that we are pushing out as much information to support our members. And during this crisis, we've been doing a significant webinar series. We've been, you know, we want to provide information to folks, but at the same time, you know, people get down. Some people, you know, a lot of us got stuck in the house, so we had to also kind of push and make sure that we are inspiring folks who are a part of our organization. And again, we are communicating through our media platforms, through webinars and through our bi-weekly newsletter. COMPTO has scheduled a series of webinars that on Thursdays, and we've done one every Thursday since the pandemic has started. And then we do, again, an inspiration series that occurs on Friday to provide members with valuable information, content, and tools that can be applied to the use of everyone during the crisis. Again, the moment of inspiration serves to uplift members through encouragement throughout this unprecedented time. We have done a very significant series of webinars that have taken place thus far in April. You know, COMPTO had its first moment of inspiration, again, with Dr. Lester Woods, who is with the Missouri DOT. And then we hosted a webinar by Mr. Miguel Lloyd and Robbie Gurlery, where they shared with our members, the information and tools necessary in order to stay productive and connected with one's business and customers under these uncertain times. And again, a webinar hosted by Dr. Andre Sims and Mr. Grant Martelli, where they discussed self-care and gave ideas for sustainability working through these times, and how we can periodically disconnect from the pressure of these demands and present some tools for effective self-care. In May, we hosted a webinar series on COVID tax implications, hosted by Maurice Tucker and Javon Goldstein of JT Goldstein, where they discussed in-depth tax implications and practical business considerations one should consider with the implementation of the following acts by Congress. The HR 6201 and the Coronavirus Aid Relief Economic Security CARES Bill, HR 748, COMTO's and HR 748. COMTO's Hub Subcommittee also hosted a webinar to discuss Small Business Toolbox overview and managing health and safety. This webinar provided our members with information about tools necessary to help advance and grow one's business, as well as discussing practical and relevant approaches to enhance one's business skills in order to compete successfully. Also in May, COMTO hosted a webinar with Deborah Owens. She's the founder of Corporate Alicat, who discussed various ways COMTO members can thrive in a new virtual workplace, such as staying connected to one's organization while working remotely, building, engaging, and nurturing one's relationship network remotely, identifying opportunities for exposure and visibility remotely. And she was really head on with common mistakes to avoid when working remotely. The day after this webinar took place, COMTO hosted another moment of inspiration by the Columbus chapter, President Quincy Howard. He also gave words of encouragement. And during June, we hosted a webinar just last week with Milo Thomas, who shared and discussed with COMTO members the importance of emotional intelligence and sense-making during a crisis, as well as tools and practices necessary in order to master and understand emotional intelligence and sense-making. Today, we're continuing our scheduled webinars, and we will share with you in the coming days, coming weeks, what we plan to do with the information that we're pushing out. So one of the things, and I would personally be remiss if I didn't want to, or I didn't bring up the subject of race. And as what we are going through right now, we are looking to address this issue head on. Sarah, thank you for participating. Paul, thank you for participating. A number of you participated in the COMTO webinar on race last week, and we're going to do more, but we're going to do more with our partners here, with WTS and APTA, AASHTO, and others as we go forward. So look out for that. We have to have this dialogue, and let's not be afraid to face things head on, and make sure that whatever we do, we are forthright and honest about this very issue that is impacting our country right now. So with that, I'll just stop. Thank you.
That's awesome. Thank you, Brad. I think what I especially like about what COMTO's been doing over the pandemic timeframe is the personal connections on healthcare, personal care, mental health. We all recognize that Zoom is great, but those personal face-to-face communications and connections are really what feed our souls. So thank you for that. I'd like to next, last but not least, introduce Neil Peterson. Neil Peterson is the TRB Executive Director for the Transportation Research Board, last jargon of the day. He's been there since 2015. He provides executive direction and leadership for this premier research organization, which all of us have participated in and benefited from. They have an annual meeting with over 13,000 transportation professionals, anxious to hear about how that's going to happen next year. And TRB has over 200 technical committees. So every piece of the advancements and innovations that we're experiencing and looking for in transportation, really that nugget starts in or is developed within TRB. Neil spent 29 years at the Maryland Department of Transportation, where he was the last 8 years the State Highway Administrator and Governor's Highway Safety Representative. And he proudly recognizes he's a member of the Washington, D.C. WTS chapter. So welcome, Neil. We're anxious to hear from you.
Thank you, Paula. Thank you to you and to Sarah for putting this webinar on. And certainly appreciated hearing from all my colleagues as well. So I will minimize the amount of time that I spend talking about TRB because I think almost all the participants are aware of it. But we say we have three major functions: convening, research, and advising. And I'll talk about what we're doing in each of those areas. As you said, we're best known for our annual meeting. We actually surpassed 14,000 this past year. And we put on a number of conferences, a number of webinars. I'll talk about that. And we have four major research programs in the areas of highways, transit, airport, and behavioral traffic safety as well. And being part of the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, we do policy advisory studies for the federal government. So TRB has been very, very active in this area. Actually, even before the lockdown took place, we recognized early on that this was going to be an issue. We started putting on our webpage even before the lockdown information about a number of resources that we have available related to pandemics. We've actually had a feature article on our webpage during the entire time of the pandemic with resource information that we do have available. And we've also been featuring information in our e-newsletter, which goes out to about 70,000 transportation professionals. So two reports in particular that really have received a lot of downloads. One was a guide for public transportation pandemic planning and response, and another infectious disease mitigation in airports and on aircraft. We also have, like the other partner organizations, have been very active with webinars. In fact, we've done 4 webinars to date, and 3 of them broke all-time records in terms of attendance for webinars. So obviously there's a craving for content. First was on practices from other disease outbreaks. Second, on supply chain in COVID-19. Third, on how COVID-19 is affecting travel behavior. And the fourth, on traffic trends and safety in a COVID-19 world. We'll have upcoming webinars June 16th on transportation experiences and next steps in the COVID-19 pandemic. June 25th on the effects of COVID-19 on the business, price managed lanes. And although the date hasn't been set, webinar in mid-July on asset management in a COVID-19 world. I'm very pleased that the Oversight Committee for the National Cooperative Highway Research Program set aside $1 million for really rapid response research related to COVID-19. We've held several sessions, including a brainstorming session with some leaders of TRB on research topics. Our list of research topics is now up to 19 pages. So we're going through and trying to do some refinement work on that as well. But it's going to really help us, not just in terms of identifying research that we should be doing, that others should be doing, but also what topics are that we really need to be focusing on in terms of our convening activities, in terms of our webinars, in terms of our calls for papers, annual meeting sessions. We held a virtual meeting in our airport cooperative research program. I'll read the title of it: Flight Plan to Recovery, Preparing Airports and Their Business Partners for the Return of the Flying Public. And they particularly wanted to be focusing on what airports and airlines need to be doing to try to increase the confidence of the flying public on use of both airports and airlines, and had over 600 people registered for that particular meeting. We, like the other organizations, have converted all of our meetings and all of our meetings to virtual meetings at this point. And we hold something on the order of about 300 meetings during a year. So this has been a pretty big deal. We've been a major customer of Zoom during the past 12 weeks. The initial response on most of our conferences that have been scheduled was to delay them, although we are now actually starting to do planning for some of the conferences being held virtual. And I know the question that you posed and that everybody is asking is what's going to happen to the TRB annual meeting. So we very carefully developed a statement, so I'm going to read it so I don't get this wrong. We are evaluating how to hold the meeting. Well, first, we are committed to holding the TRB annual meeting in January. So we definitely will be holding the meeting. We're evaluating how to hold the meeting in a way that ensures the health and safety of everyone involved in the event, including whether some or all of the meeting will be held virtually. The final decision will be made in the summer and will be announced at that time. I would guess probably in the July timeframe. As you can imagine, it's one thing to plan for a conference, a virtual conference for 300. It's a very, very different issue to try to plan for a conference for 14,000. So an awful lot of thought is going into how to be doing this now. And we want to give our due diligence and not be making premature decisions on this. So again, thank you for putting this webinar on, and I look forward to the rest of the discussion.
Thank you, Neil. I know all of us who have hotel contracts that we've had to try and renegotiate for this year totally understand the complexity of what has to happen and when you can announce things. And it's been quite the dance, hasn't it?
Yes,
and it's a sad state of affairs for our hotels who have worked with us so closely on how to put on great events and the uncertainty that they're experiencing. So I feel for everybody. So I'm glad everybody's back on, and make sure you pay attention to your mute button if you want to speak. I have a few more questions about how we change the way, and whether we'll change the way we're going to do business as associations as we move forward. Surely we've all come to appreciate technology and the opportunity for more people to attend things when they aren't just an in-person meeting. So I'm thinking of how we integrate both virtual and in-person meetings. But what all have you learned that you think will sustain on how we do business as organizations as we move into the future? Anybody want to start?
Paula, perhaps I can begin, and inspired by Neil's statement on the TRB annual meeting here and the challenges around that. Neil, I feel somewhat better. You know, we have our every third year, our annual meeting and exposition, which is a very large trade show. And we attract about 13,000 attendees. And we are in this due diligence mode, as you described it, Neil, trying to make a decision about what we do, because you do want to safeguard your attendees. That's an obligation that we all have. At the same time, I must admit that meetings like that are a huge revenue source. So for APTA, for example, our revenue stream is twofold that gives us our livelihood. One is member dues, and the second is the revenue that we generate from our meetings. And so we've had to cancel no less than, I think, a half a dozen meetings beginning in March through the balance of this calendar year. And we don't quite know what's in store after that. I think, Paula, what we've seen is that there's still a thirst in this mode that we're in for information, as many of our colleagues have said. And we have done so many webinars and town halls and the like, and there seems to be no abatement in terms of attendance. We've had upwards of almost 2,000 attendees for individual webinars. And so the thirst for information sharing is great. And I think that even if we do go back to the personal face-to-face meetings that we hope we can get back to, I see the virtual aspect of it always being now a major part of what we do. I think what we all have to figure out, can we make any money doing that as well, besides all the free stuff that we give out, which is wonderful for our members. But again, as associations who have to kind of pay the bills, if you will, we have to figure out ways to generate that into revenue. But it's quite a learning experience. I, for one, was amazed as how quickly we made the pivot. I had my doubts as to whether we could so quickly turn around our own organization online to really function effectively, and we did, and have been doing it without missing a beat. So there's a lot to learn there that we can build on, and giving us the confidence that perhaps we can do more than just the face-to-face meetings, also have a very strong virtual component, and that enriches the offerings that we have for our members.
Paul, I'd like to associate myself and Compto with the comments that you just made, and I'm very, I'd like to let all of you know that for Compto, our annual conference is our largest fundraiser, as well as secondarily celebrating women who move the nation. It just broke my heart not to be able to do that this year, and we have pushed it to later in the year, but there's still some, we don't quite know whether that might happen as well. But as we're going forward, we are, as an organization, going to have to adapt to a virtual environment and make sure that as we're adapting, that we become a very attractive entity in doing that. And again, that's by providing information. And Paula, one thing I thank you about is pointing out the fact that Compto is very interested in making sure that the health of our folks is good, and what we're doing and making sure that we take care of ourselves, we take care of our home, we take care of our families, as well as our organization going forward. The other thing, and lastly, again, I want to do as much to work with all of you to share our resources and experiences as we go forward. So look forward to working with all of you in the time to come.
I'd like to just add a couple of things to what I said before. I think we've all experienced Zoom fatigue. It's very difficult to stay on Zoom for more than about 2 to 2.5 hours at one time. So when you have conferences that go from 8 in the morning until 8 at night, it's you really have to rethink how you try to put them on, and maybe spread them out over more days. There are also time zone issues. Just thinking about the annual meeting alone, we have people from 70 different nations, that from every time zone in the world, and how to try to logistically think about time zone issues just for domestic meetings alone is a challenge. Just start to think about that for international issues as well. But I do have to say that in shifting to meetings that are held virtually, it does enable us to actually have more meetings than we had before, and have more shorter meetings. And we've actually found that our productivity for our committee meetings, particularly meetings for our policy studies, has actually improved as a result. So I don't think we'll be going back to traditionally holding all of our meetings face to face. We obviously still need to have some, but I think we're going to see a lot more virtual meetings. The other point that I just want to make is that our communications have just skyrocketed, especially through use of social media. And we're seeing much, much more interaction with our stakeholders through use of social media now.
I'll say for AASHTO, maybe I'm not speaking totally on behalf of AASHTO, but for Brandy Hendrickson, that I am not at a point where I'm ready to yield to an environment where we don't have handshakes and hugs and toast each other in person just yet. But I do, as an organization, we do recognize that we have to pivot, and we do have to kind of take the all of the factors, whether it's attendee comfort level or our members' ability to travel, like on the financial side, because we're dealing with, public employees. And so while our meetings are not, we try to with our meetings, they're not revenue generators, but we really try to maintain, you know, a kind of a cost neutral approach to our meetings. We do recognize that if we shift to an environment where we have a combination of in-person and virtual meetings, that'll actually be an increased cost for us. So there are a lot of factors that go into when you decide to cancel a meeting, a lot of factors that go into making sure that you have quality content in a virtual meeting that keeps people engaged. And we're all recognizing that we're learning on the fly, and we're kind of in a posture of really just educating ourselves on how to provide the best, you know, most productive meetings in this new environment. So we do anticipate that if we shift solely to virtual meetings, that we'll have to consider whether it makes sense to apply registration fees to these virtual meetings, and you know, what is the tolerance and the ability of our members and partner organizations to be able to participate in that way. So
I know there's, we had a comment in our chat room about charging fees for webinars, and we've all had that conversation. It seems like it wasn't appropriate to kick people while they're down during the COVID crisis to try and ask for money through a webinar. And with all the free webinars out there that draw attention, it's really hard to have a compelling kind of a setting that people will want to pay for. But I do think that may be an eventuality. And one of the things I want to recognize, because I know particularly I've worked with ARPA and AASHTO on sponsorship benefits, which have totally, the rug has been pulled out from under our corporate sponsors on the ability to have that kind of visibility and face-to-face relationship building time. And the associations have worked really hard to find those benefits that might be different, but still provide the opportunities for people to engage. And I think that's one of the things that I recognize now that I'm on the private sector, how important it is for us to feel like we're contributing to the public sector's goals, and finding ways for all of us to, as industry partners, truly collaborate on achieving those things that we're trying to do for the transportation system. So I like that we're all here together talking, and I hope that we sustain this kind of conversation as we move forward together. As you think about recovery, I'd like to think about the resilience steps, you know, and we're moving into a recovery phase for transportation where the impacts have been hit and they've been great on our transportation systems. Have you thought about or identified how your focus will be to shift or at least place your priorities in the recovery phase? Transit has been hit so heavily. Highways, tolls, you know, our pricing was already going down, you know, as we speak in the way that we sustain transportation investments. Have you all thought about this as an opportunity to shift priorities to really change the focus or the priorities of your organization and the association? Any thoughts on that?
Mm-hmm. Sure, Paula. I can just share with you what we have done. You know, actually in just a couple of hours, we're starting a board meeting of APTA, and we'll be adopting, hopefully, a budget for fiscal 21, which starts July 1st, together with our business plan. And we totally relooked our business plan in the context of what the pandemic has brought to us. And so we've reshuffled our priorities a bit. Most of them were relevant, but now they're looked at through the lens of how we recover from this pandemic. And in that regard, our APTA chair, Nuria Fernandez, who, by the way, WTS International Awarded Woman of the Year, she established a new national task force. And that task force is specifically looking at a national level how transit can recover and restore and position for the future. Phil Washington is chairing that from LA Metro as the CEO of LA Metro. So it's taken on really a big significance. And with that, co-chairs of Paul Wiedefeld here in Washington, D.C., and with WMATA, Joanne Pickerton from Columbus, Ohio. She's the CEO of CODA. and Kim Slaughter, an executive with HNTB. So this group is really leading an effort here to look at the issues of how we win back and rebuild public confidence so it's safe to use public transit, which is a big issue. What kinds of things can be done to restore and make that service really safe to use? And so Paul Wiedefeld will be focusing his group there, and then establishing kind of a vision for what comes out of the pandemic. How do we position the industry so it can continue to not only survive, which we must do first, but also to position it to thrive going forward? So that's our focus here over the next few months.
One thing that I am particularly interested in, and Compto is particularly interested in, again, is the health of the ridership in the transportation industry, just across the board. And as all of you know, with the significant rate of infection and death from minorities from COVID, we are going to concentrate on making sure that we're going to watch out for the health of our workers, and we're going to watch out for the health of our public transportation riders as we're going forward. And we want to make sure that, again, we engage with all of you and make sure that the minority community and many of the inner cities and just across the country are being served properly. One of the other things I want to make sure of, and we push out, is that we have a significant source of PPE. And if any of you are interested in making sure that you get significant amounts of PPEs going forward, we have a source. And we will share that with you if you're interested. So as we go forward, let us know and we'll be in touch.
Wonderful. In the interest of time, I want to shift to our last question, because I really think that we've been building to this moment. As we think about this place of opportunity that we have in our industry, it's almost a reinvention. We've all been sitting at home thinking more than we normally do, perhaps. But as we emerge from the pandemic and with an awakened recognition of racial injustice, how do we use this transformative time for all of us together to work on how to bring the kind of diversity, equity, access to the transportation systems, as well as our workforce? Your members, our members, we're all working in either a public or private sector. And this may be the moment where we can accomplish many things and change the path that we had been on with transportation and workforce balance. And I'm wondering if you have thoughts about that.
Can I take that one out of
Sure.
just coming out of the box? And one of the things I wanted to do is make sure that as an industry that we're dealing with the issue of diversity, and we're dealing with the issue of race as we're going forward. Sometimes we're reluctant to talk, and we're reluctant to talk straight about the issue. And with what's been going on here recently in the country, this has given us our ticket on all sides to be very, very frank and honest about where we are and come up with the strategies and our plans to deal with it head on. I know that Paul and I have already dealt with this issue. Sarah was on our call last week, but Neil and everybody, Brandy, I'm going to reach out to all of you, and let's see if we can do what we can do comprehensively as representative entities from the industry to deal with this whole race issue head on, and if at the proper time come up with a proper statement to let folks know that we are very serious about addressing all of this. So
Thank you.
If I could jump in here, I couldn't agree with Brad more. I think it's an issue that we have been reluctant to talk about, and it's an issue that we must talk about. We have to have the courage to be able to have the conversation and not be worried about we might offend someone by something that we say. Some of you may know that I actually issued a statement in yesterday's, I guess Tuesday's TRBE newsletter, And it was actually the first time that an executive director of a program division at the National Academies issued a statement of that type, but I just felt it was something that I had to do, and actually had supported my bosses for doing it as well. But a couple of things that I said in that statement, I think we spend too much time talking and not enough time listening, and we have to be listening to each other about what the issues are that we have to be addressing. I think transportation both has been part of the problem, but also really provides us an opportunity to try to address the problem as well. And we really do need to be thinking about what transportation's role needs to be providing opportunities and access to opportunity. We need to be thinking about who's involved in our activities. And I think too often in organizations like TRB, we welcome everyone, but it's almost passive in terms of we accept who it is that comes, as opposed to saying, oh, we have to go out and really proactively making sure that we have underrepresented individuals and groups involved. And we also really have to be thinking about the next generation and really trying to attract more underrepresented, whether it is minorities or women, into our field, and thinking about creative ways that we can try to be attracting more as well. So there are some thoughts in terms of areas that I think that collectively we need to all be focusing on.
Paula, this is Paul. I'd like to offer a comment as well, if you can hear me. Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Welcome back.
Thank you. I don't know what happened there. It got zoned out. But, you know, I missed the last part of what Brad had to say, and I did pick up on Neil's. But I would say that, you know, our individual associations are very influential unto themselves. But I think that we all have some very common goals at the core of it. We all want to see a more effective transportation network in this country, a healthier transportation network. That means opportunity for our people across the board. And I think that there are areas that we can work together, in addition to our MOUs that we have individually, to come together on some of these very critical issues, to be a voice for transportation that not only fights for equality, which is critically important, as Brad and others have talked about here, but also to be sure that we are doing our very best to grow our industry, to provide opportunity, to advance women, to advance minorities, to really establish it as a force to be reckoned with. And I think we have that with the collection of associations and groups that we have here. So I would say that's a challenge for us. We ought to embrace that and see what we can do.
Sounds great. Dave?
Well, I think you came off on the tail end of, or you fell off on the tail end. That's the one thing. And I want to personally give APTA kudos for the statements and the forthrightness in which they've dealt with this whole issue of race and diversity. So, Paul, I want to make sure I let you know that.
Thank you. I think Dave's been trying to get in as well.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, every time I do one of these, I'm reminded at how bad I would be at one of the game shows where you have to hit a buzzer. Y'all can go on without me on that. But anyway, look, that's a great question. And I mean, we were, like others, very enthusiastic about the MOU that we signed with WTS several years ago. The discussion, can and will continue to be going on. Workforce for the construction sector, both in terms of composition and availability, has been a challenge for a long time. The difficulty, as we've all seen in the last couple of months, and Brandy mentioned this, we've got members also that have had substantial layoffs already because of the decline in construction activity. And, that I know we're wrapping up, and not to end on a sobering note, but, when we look at the last recession, highway and street construction took 8 years to recover back to its pre-Great Recession level. It took until 2015 just to get the same level of work in place as we had almost 10 years before. Less work means less employees. I mean, and we partner with AASHTO and APTA and anybody and everybody on our market preservation and expansion activities, and we'll continue to do that. But that's for the construction sector. That's a critical component of the workforce discussion, because we need to have a market.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I want to respect everyone's time. I heard you all commit to continue to work together. So this is something that we're going to perhaps talk more about how we do that on a regular basis, and really leverage what we have as the power of memberships to affect the change that we're trying to have. I want to remind you all that WTS is 68 chapters strong around the US and Canada. We have over 8,000 members. And if any of you listening today are not a member of WTS, please join. There's likely a chapter near you. We appreciate the opportunity that we have to recruit, retain, and advance women in the transportation industry, and are seeking the kind of diversity and equity that we've talked about today. So I think the world is our oyster. We have a lot of opportunities, and I think if we optimistically go forward, we're going to do great things. This recording is going to be saved and available on the WTS website. So thank you all for joining, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paula.
Thank you.
Thanks.